Hi folks, it is your after-action report writing diplomacy chronicler, Florida Man here, bringing you a diplomacy commentary from a game I played on the Versailles map, called Empires of Versailles. I saw all the positive feedback from last time I made a variant after-action report, and with this I aim to please those who love the variants. This game was especially variant from the standard game, since not only was it on a different map, as I've already mentioned, but it was also played under the Age of Empires rule set. The Age of Empires rules are meant to simulate a time before nations were really set in stone, and therefore each power starts out with only a single center, meant to represent the small settlements and city-states that tended to exist before countries began forming. This also means that the game itself starts in the BC era rather than the AD era, so the years count down rather than up. Every center that a country acquires can be used as a home center for that country, since this represents an era when empires were being established. Now that I've got that slightly confusing background information out of the way, let's go into the actual game. I wasn't in this game from the very beginning, but I did join pretty quickly, therefore I'll go over the entire game from beginning to end. The position I was ultimately going to play was Italy, and my minor would be Czechoslovakia, so the starting positions were here. The original Italian and Czech player began the game by capturing Munich and Trieste, which seemed like a good start. Unfortunately, at that point he stopped issuing orders and he ultimately surrendered. While the other players were growing their empires around this person, the Italian and Czech empires atrophied due to this decision. One of the big downsides of taking on a surrendered power in Versailles is also that because surrendered countries stop issuing orders, it becomes obvious which major is associated with which minor, whereas that's something that I would normally try to only reveal to my allies at first. So I joined. I started moving to grow again, and I communicated with my neighbors, trying to figure out who might be a good ally for a stagnant Italian-Czech empire. My first targets for expansion were the unoccupied neutral center of Austria, and the Greek-occupied portion of the Italian peninsula, which I wanted to consolidate. I believe I tried to talk Greece into giving it up willingly, but that rarely happens, unfortunately, so I didn't have much hope of it this time. I was successful in allying with France, with the result that my Czech forces supported France into Kiel, while I positioned to hopefully take Berlin for myself. The Italian offensive was also successful. I did occupy a French center here, and Germany got into Munich, but that was because France asked me to defend that French center from Spain, which was controlled by Germany. Unfortunately, instead of going for Switzerland as we expected, Germany used Spain to support himself into Munich. It's at this point that I made a strength of the fact that Czechoslovakia and Italy were known to be controlled by the same person, and I started blatantly using the orders from each power to support the other, and my ally, retaking Munich and positioning to finish Spain off. Here, you can see the offensive against Germany and Spain is pretty much concluded. I take Tunisia, that finishes off Spain, and now there are wars going on to either side of me, which is pretty interesting and gives me a chance to consider where I'm going next. Yugoslavia and Turkey are the same player, and they are going to war with Poland and Egypt, which is also the same player. Since Yugoslavia is easier for me to attack than Poland, and Poland doesn't seem all that strong right now, I decide to take the Polish side. In the west, there's a war going on between Britain and France. And ultimately, what I decide to do here is stab France and take the British side, instead of just letting the war rage by itself, and possibly allowing France to consolidate power in the west and potentially come after me. It was a difficult decision. I think stabbing France was a high-risk move here, but ultimately, I'm always biased toward being proactive and not reactive. And I did see that there was a ton of risk in just letting France and Britain fight and potentially resolve the conflict on their own. The result, though, is that from this point on, the game is almost a free-for-all. This game, for me, ended up illustrating what a terrible mistake it is to get into a two-front war, even though, in my situation, I do think it was difficult to avoid. Although I helped Poland and Egypt defeat Turkey and Yugoslavia in the east, and therefore actually sort of won on that front, my war with France took longer, and the result is that Poland and Egypt, after finishing their opponents off with my help, were able to turn on me before I could finish France. I started losing ground to them, because my forces were divided and theirs were not, and at the same time I had French and Swedish units behind my lines, although much diminished in force and numbers, with Sweden being the French minor. France and Sweden were reluctant to make peace with me, because of all that I had done. But we did ultimately begin working together and joined forces against Poland and Egypt, including Britain in this coalition to stop the Solo. But it was too little, too late. Since the Versailles map does not have any stalemate lines as far as I have ever seen or been able to uncover, a frequent phenomenon when one player gets significantly ahead and starts to gain momentum toward a solo is that it quickly becomes almost impossible to stop that person. And ultimately, Poland successfully gets as far west as Austria and Prague, while Egypt invades Trieste and Naples, giving the Polish-Egyptian Empire the solo victory. It was an unfortunate loss, in a game that, at the midpoint, seemed to be well under control for me and heading towards an Italian-Czech solo. From a story of triumph and what I thought would be one of my famous comebacks from a relatively weak surrendered position, it turned into a tale of ignominious defeat due to hubris. Let it be a lesson to all of you, and especially to me, about the dangers of overconfidence when you're playing a central power. I hope you enjoyed this diplomacy video. If so, you should like and subscribe and comment below for more ideas on diplomacy content you would like to see. And if you really want to go above the norm in showing your support, you could emulate the people whose names now appear on screen, who have contributed by either writing foreign language subtitles or joining my Patreon. Please join me in thanking them. And until next time, Florida Man out.